Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the blood-drained livestock and mass hysteria of 1990s Puerto Rico, where a monster was born, not from ancient folklore, but from a woman's memory of a terrible sci-fi movie. We're talking about the Chupacabra. Before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? And if you're from Latin America, have you heard stories about the Chupacabra? Did your family warn you about it? Maybe you remember the panic in the 90s, or heard tales from relatives who lived through it. I'd love to hear your story. Now dim the lights, get comfortable in your blankets, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of legendary monsters, you probably imagine creatures from ancient folklore. Dragons passed down through generations, vampires from medieval Europe, werewolves that haunted villages for centuries, stories so old that nobody remembers who told them first. The Chupacabra is none of those things. The Chupacabra is younger than the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It's the same age as Windows 95. It first appeared in March 1995, which means this legendary cryptid that's supposedly been terrorizing livestock across 2 continents is barely old enough to rent a car. And here's the uncomfortable part. We can trace its entire origin story. We know exactly when it started. We know who saw it first. We know what movie she watched right before her sighting. And we know that the creature she described matches that movie's alien monster so perfectly that calling it coincidence requires more faith and believing in actual goat-sucking demons. The Chupacabra isn't ancient folklore that gradually evolved over centuries. It's what happens when someone watches a B-movie about a sexy alien killing people, has some kind of confabulation episode a few weeks later, describes the movie monster as if it were real, and then the entire Spanish-speaking world decides she must be telling the truth because livestock keep dying in ways that are completely consistent with normal predator behavior, but get attributed to vampires anyway. This is a monster created by Hollywood, mass media, and the early internet. A cryptid born in the age of cable television and international phone calls. The first legendary creature whose origin can be tracked like a disease outbreak, complete with patient zero, transmission vectors, and a clearly identifiable point of contamination. Which raises an obvious question. If we know the Chupacabra was basically invented by accident in 1995, why do people still claim to see it? Why does the legend persist when we have the receipts showing exactly how it started? And what does it say about human nature that we can watch folklore being manufactured in real time and still choose to believe the monster is real? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about how myths work in the modern world, about what we need monsters to be, and about why sometimes the lie is more useful than the truth. But let's start with what actually happened, because the origin story of the Chupacabra is weirder than the monster itself. March 1995, Puerto Rico. A farmer in the town of Orocovis discovered 8 of his sheep dead in their pen. The bodies showed no signs of struggle, no torn flesh, no defensive wounds. Just 3 puncture marks on each animal's chest, and what appeared to be complete blood loss. This was strange, but not unprecedented. Livestock die from predators all the time. Dogs, wildcats, even rats can kill penned animals overnight. But the farmer insisted something was wrong. The scene didn't match normal predation patterns. And those puncture wounds looked deliberate, surgical, wrong. Local veterinarians examined the carcasses. Their official conclusion: death by exsanguination, likely from puncture wounds to major blood vessels. Cause of punctures: unknown. Predator species: unidentified, which is veterinary speak for, we have no idea what happened, but we're not saying vampires because we'd like to keep our medical licenses. The incident got reported in local news. A few people paid attention. Most didn't. Rural livestock deaths aren't exactly breaking news, even when the circumstances are unusual. The story should have died there, forgotten in the endless cycle of weird local incidents that don't quite make sense, but aren't interesting enough to investigate thoroughly. Then it happened again, and again, and again. By August 1995, more than 150 farm animals and pets were dead around the town of Canavanas alone, all showing similar patterns: puncture wounds, apparent blood loss, no obvious predator. And now people were paying attention because 150 dead animals in 5 months is too many for coincidence. The media descended. Every local news station needed footage of dead goats and traumatized farmers. Radio shows discussed theories. Newspapers ran competing stories about what could be killing livestock across Puerto Rico in such numbers with such unusual methodology. Theories proliferated. Satanic cults were popular. Secret government experiments ranked high. Escaped exotic animals from private collections got serious consideration. A few people suggested vampires, but mostly as jokes, because suggesting actual vampires on television is how you stop getting invited on television. What nobody suggested, because nobody had seen it yet, was that the killer might be a 3-foot-tall gray alien with spikes down its back that hopped like a kangaroo and had eyes the size of hen's eggs. That description came from Madelyne Tolentino. August 1995. Madelyne Tolentino looked out her window in Canavanas and saw something that would define cryptozoology for the next 3 decades. According to her account, the creature stood about 3 to 4 feet tall. It walked upright on 2 legs. Its skin was gray and leathery, described as either reptilian or alien-like, depending on which interview you read. Running down its back from neck to tail were prominent spikes or quills. Its eyes were huge, black, and reflective. Its arms were long with 3-fingered hands that ended in claws. The creature moved strangely, she said. Not like an animal, more like something that had watched animals move and was doing an approximation. It hopped occasionally like a kangaroo, tilted its head at odd angles, made no sound that she could hear. She watched it for maybe 30 seconds before it disappeared around the corner of a building. Then she called everyone she could think of to report what she'd seen. A local UFO researcher, Jorge Martin, interviewed her and created a sketch based on her description. That sketch got published in newspapers, distributed across Puerto Rico, and within days, people started reporting that they'd seen the same creature, or creatures just like it, all matching Tolentino's description with remarkable consistency. The monster needed a name. Puerto Rican comedian and radio host Silverio Perez provided one during a broadcast discussing the livestock deaths and Tolentino's sighting. He called it El Chupacabras, combining chuper to suck and cabras, goats. The goat sucker. The name stuck immediately because it was perfect, descriptive, memorable, and just unsettling enough to sound like something that could drain your sheep of blood while you slept. The Chupacabra went from local phenomenon to international sensation within weeks. Television shows covered it. Newspapers ran stories. The Spanish-language talk show El Show de Cristina, basically the Oprah of Latin America, did an entire episode on it that reached millions of viewers across multiple countries. And here's where things get interesting. Because Benjamin Radford, a scientific investigator who spent 5 years researching the Chupacabra phenomenon, found something that should have ended the legend before it really started. The movie Species opened in Puerto Rico on July 7, 1995, exactly 1 month before Madelyne Tolentino reported her sighting. Species, for anyone who missed this particular artifact of 1990s cinema, is a science fiction horror film about an alien-human hybrid named Syl, who escapes from a government lab and goes on a killing spree while trying to mate with human men. The creature design was created by H.R. Geiger, the artist behind the Alien franchise. Syl in her alien form is a biomechanical humanoid with prominent spines running down her back, enormous dark eyes, gray skin, and an overall appearance that can only be described as nightmarish sexy space monster. When Radford interviewed Tolentino years later, he asked her directly whether she'd seen species before her sighting. She admitted she had, saw it in theaters, remembered it clearly, even acknowledged that the creature in the film looked remarkably similar to what she claimed to have seen outside her window. It was a creature that looked like the Chupacabra, with spines on its back and all, she told Radford. The resemblance to the Chupacabra was really impressive. She got the timeline backwards. She didn't see a creature that looked like the one from Species. She saw Species and then, a month later, described its monster as if she'd seen it in real life. Radford's conclusion, backed by 5 years of investigation and interviews. Madelyne Tolentino experienced confabulation, a psychological phenomenon where people genuinely believe false memories are real, where the line between fiction and reality blurs so completely that lived experience and media consumption become indistinguishable. She didn't lie. Liars know they're lying. Confabulation means she honestly believed she saw an alien creature outside her window. Her brain took imagery from a movie she'd recently watched, combined it with the hysteria about livestock deaths that was saturating Puerto Rican media, and produced a false memory so convincing that she could describe it in extraordinary detail. Detail that, by the way, included things she shouldn't have been able to see. She claimed to observe that the creature had no anus. This from a sighting that lasted 30 seconds at a distance through a window. Either she has superhuman visual acuity, or she's describing a creature from a movie where the designers probably didn't bother giving the monster an anus, because why would you? The confabulation theory explains everything. The timing, the specificity, the fact that her description doesn't match any known animal, but matches a Hollywood special effect perfectly. The reason her account became the template for all subsequent Chupacabra sightings, even though cryptid descriptions usually vary wildly between witnesses. Tolentino saw Species. The movie's imagery lodged in her subconscious. A month later, surrounded by news coverage of mysterious livestock deaths, her brain produced a false memory that synthesized the movie monster with her environment. She genuinely believed what she reported. And because her description was so detailed and confident, everyone else believed her too. Which means the Chupacabra, the third most famous cryptid in the world after Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, the creature that has been sighted across 2 continents for 30 years, the monster that tens of thousands of people claim is real, exists because one woman couldn't tell the difference between a movie she watched and something she actually saw. This should have killed the legend. When Radford published his findings in 2011, the evidence was overwhelming. The timeline was clear. The movie connection was undeniable. Tolentino herself admitted to watching Species right before her sighting and acknowledged the resemblance. But the legend didn't die. People kept seeing Chupacabras, kept reporting attacks, kept insisting the creature was real, despite the mountain of evidence showing its origin as a movie-induced hallucination. And here's why. By the time Radford proved the Chupacabra's origin, the legend had already evolved past Tolentino's description. The original Puerto Rican Chupacabra, the one based on Species, was described as bipedal, walking upright, reptilian and alien-like. That version appeared in early reports from 1995 and 1996. It matched Tolentino's account because everyone was copying her description, consciously or unconsciously. But as the legend spread north through Mexico and into the southwestern United States, the description changed, shifted, mutated through a combination of mistranslation, cultural telephone, and the introduction of actual evidence in the form of dead animals that people started claiming were chupacabras. The creature went from bipedal to quadrupedal, from alien-like to canine, from gray and reptilian to hairless and mangy. The spines became a pronounced spinal ridge. The 3-fingered claws became regular dog paws. The enormous eyes became the sunken sockets of a sick animal. By the early 2000s, there were effectively two different chupacabras. The original Puerto Rican version, still described as bipedal and alien-like, and the mainland version, described as a hairless dog-like creature with mange. And this is where the scientific explanation kicks in. Because unlike the Puerto Rican sightings, which were purely testimonial with no physical evidence, the mainland sightings started producing bodies. Dead creatures that people photographed, preserved, and in some cases submitted for analysis. Every single one tested so far has been a coyote. Specifically, coyotes with severe cases of sarcoptic mange. Mange is a parasitic skin disease caused by mites that burrow into an animal's skin. In severe cases, it causes complete hair loss, thickening and wrinkling of the skin, emaciation from constant scratching and metabolic stress, and behavioral changes as the animal becomes desperate for easy prey because it's too weak to hunt normally. A coyote with advanced mange looks exactly like modern chupacabra descriptions. The hair loss makes it appear hairless and alien. The emaciation makes its spine and ribs incredibly prominent, creating that distinctive ridge people describe. The skin thickening makes it look reptilian or leathery. The weakness and desperation drive it to attack penned livestock instead of wild prey because it's too sick to chase rabbits. The blood-drained appearance of victims comes from how coyotes kill. They attack the throat, causing multiple puncture wounds as they bite and rebite to maintain grip. The blood pools internally or drains into the ground. The coyote, being sick and desperate, might eat less than a healthy predator would. The result, a dead animal with throat wounds and minimal external trauma, which to a frightened farmer looks like surgical blood extraction rather than messy predation. Texas A&M researchers, among others, have documented this pattern extensively. They've examined dozens of alleged chupacabra carcasses, run DNA tests, performed necropsies on victims. Every single case has the same conclusion. Sarcoptic mange in coyotes, sometimes dogs, occasionally other canids. The explanation is boring. A parasitic disease makes animals look weird. Sick predators attack easy targets. Frightened people interpret normal predation through the lens of existing legend. No vampires, no aliens. Just sick dogs killing livestock in ways that are completely consistent with sick dogs killing livestock. But boring explanations don't spread like supernatural ones. And by the time the scientific explanation became widely available, the chupacabra had already achieved cultural penetration that facts couldn't dislodge. The legend had been featured in X-Files episodes, Futurama parodies, countless books, documentaries, and news segments. Children grew up hearing stories about the goat sucker. Adults shared chupacabra sightings on early internet forums. The creature became embedded in popular culture to the point where everyone knows what a chupacabra is even if nobody can agree on what one looks like. This cultural saturation created a feedback loop. People heard about chupacabras, expected to see chupacabras, then interpreted ambiguous sightings as chupacabras because that's the monster their culture had primed them to recognize. A mangy coyote stops being a sick animal and becomes confirmation that the legend is real. The phenomenon isn't unique to chupacabras. It's how all modern monster legends work. Someone reports something unusual. Media amplifies it. The story spreads faster than fact-checking can keep up. By the time debunking arrives, the legend has already become common knowledge that people defend against evidence because questioning it means admitting they believed something false. And humans hate admitting they believed something false. Easier to dismiss the scientific explanation as cover-up, ignore the timeline showing the Hollywood connection, reject the DNA, evidence proving the bodies are just sick dogs. Easier to keep believing in the monster than accept that the monster is boring. This creates a situation where the chupacabra simultaneously doesn't exist and is completely real. It doesn't exist as a biological entity. No unidentified species is killing livestock. Every testable claim has mundane explanations. but it absolutely exists as a cultural entity, a shared belief, a narrative framework that people use to interpret events that frighten or confuse them. The Chupacabra is real the way money is real, not as a physical thing, but as a collective agreement to treat something imaginary as if it has tangible effects. And those effects are tangible. Farmers genuinely afraid to let livestock out. Communities organizing monster hunts. Tourism industries built around cryptid sightings. Fear that changes behavior, even though its source is fictional. This is what makes the Chupacabra fascinating, beyond just debunking it. Because understanding that it's not real doesn't explain why it persists. Doesn't explain why new sightings still get reported. Doesn't explain why people who've never seen species, who've never been to Puerto Rico, who live in places where no livestock have been mysteriously killed, still believe in a monster that provably started as one woman's false memory of a B-movie. The answer lies in understanding what monsters actually do, what function they serve, why humans need them even when, maybe especially when, we know they're not real. Because the Chupacabra isn't really about goat sucking. It's about explaining the unexplained. About having a narrative for livestock deaths that feel wrong. About communities creating shared enemies that justify shared fear. About the modern world being so confusing and uncertain that even a fake monster provides more comfort than admitting we don't understand what's killing our animals, and probably never will. The scientific explanation, sarcoptic mange in coyotes, is correct, but it's also unsatisfying. It doesn't account for every livestock death, doesn't explain why some attacks seem surgically precise, doesn't provide an enemy you can hunt down and eliminate. You can't shoot a disease, can't trap a parasite, can't protect your farm from microscopic mites making local predators desperate. But you can hunt the Chupacabra, can set traps for it, can organize community watches, can do something, even if that something is believing in a monster that doesn't exist, because believing in the monster gives you agency that believing in sick dogs doesn't. This is why debunking doesn't work. Why showing someone the species comparison, the DNA evidence, the mange timeline, often strengthens their belief rather than weakening it. Because the belief isn't about evidence, it's about narrative. About having a story that makes emotional sense even when it doesn't make factual sense. The Chupacabra provides that story. It explains livestock deaths in ways that feel significant rather than random. It creates shared experience across communities and cultures. It gives people something to talk about, investigate, protect against. It turns mundane tragedy into mythic narrative. And humans need mythic narrative. We've needed it for the entire span of our existence as a species. The only thing that's changed is the speed at which we can create and spread new myths. Where ancient monsters took centuries to develop through oral tradition, the Chupacabra went from movie monster to international cryptid in months, thanks to television, newspapers, and early internet communication. We're watching folklore being manufactured in real time, seeing exactly how myths work when you strip away the centuries of accumulated tradition. And what we're learning is uncomfortable. People will believe monsters exist, even when you show them the receipt for how the monster was invented. The Chupacabra proves that belief isn't about evidence, it's about need. And right now, for reasons we're still figuring out, people need to believe in monsters more than they need to believe in sarcoptic mange. Understanding why that need exists, what it reveals about modern anxiety and the stories we tell ourselves to manage fear, requires looking at how the legend actually spread, at who believed it and why, at what happened in the communities where Chupacabra sightings became epidemic despite zero physical evidence. Because the story of the Chupacabra isn't really about whether the monster exists, it's about why we want it to. Let's get specific about how the legend spread, because the transmission pattern reveals as much about modern folklore as the origin story does. Tolentino's sighting hit newspapers in August 1995. Within 2 weeks, reports started coming from other parts of Puerto Rico. People claimed to see the same creature, Same height, same spikes, same alien appearance. The consistency was remarkable, almost too remarkable. When cryptid sightings occur naturally, descriptions vary wildly. Bigfoot reports range from 8 feet to 15 feet tall. Loch Ness Monster accounts describe everything from dinosaurs to giant eels to floating logs. Witnesses see different things because they're interpreting ambiguous stimuli through personal frameworks. But the early Chupacabra sightings all matched Tolentino's description precisely, because they weren't independent observations. They were people who'd seen the newspaper sketch, internalized that image, and then either consciously or unconsciously reproduced it when reporting their own sightings. Some were probably deliberate fabrications. Small towns get attention from mysterious monster reports. Tourism increases. Media comes calling. Being the person who saw the Chupacabra gets you on television, provides local celebrity, gives you a story to tell for years. Others were likely genuine confabulation, same as Tolentino. People hearing about the creature, seeing the sketch, and then experiencing false memories or misinterpreting normal animals as matching the established template. Your brain knows what a Chupacabra looks like now. So when you glimpse something weird in poor light, your brain helpfully fills in the details to match what you've been primed to expect. A few might have been actual sightings of something, anything, that got reported as Chupacabra, because that's the framework Puerto Rican culture had provided for interpreting strange animals. See something you can't identify? Must be the goat sucker everyone's talking about. The mechanism doesn't matter as much as the result. Within months, Puerto Rico had over 200 reported Chupacabra sightings, all following Tolentino's template, all reinforcing each other's credibility through sheer volume. If one person sees a monster, that's delusion. If 200 people see it, that's evidence. Except it's not evidence, it's social contagion. Mass hysteria operating through media amplification. Each report makes the next report more likely because it normalizes the idea that Chupacabras exist. And the more normalized the idea becomes, the more people interpret ambiguous experiences as confirming it. El Show de Cristina's coverage of the phenomenon reached millions of viewers across Latin America in October 1995. The show treated Chupacabras as real, mysterious, and worthy of serious discussion, brought on witnesses, showed dramatic reenactments, presented theories about government experiments and alien origins. For millions of Spanish speakers, that episode was their introduction to the Chupacabra, and the framing mattered enormously. If your first exposure to a monster is through news saying some people claim, you might be skeptical. If your first exposure is through a trusted talk show host presenting it as an ongoing mystery with multiple credible witnesses, you're significantly more likely to believe. The internet age hadn't fully arrived yet in 1995. No social media, no YouTube, no Wikipedia providing instant fact-checking. Information spread through television, radio, newspapers, and increasingly, early web forums where enthusiasts collected and shared sighting reports without the burden of verification. This created ideal conditions for legend propagation. Fast enough spread to reach critical mass before debunking could catch up. Slow enough that regional variations could develop without immediate contradiction. And decentralized enough that no single authority could kill the story by proving it false. By 1996, Chupacabra reports were appearing throughout Latin America. Mexico had sightings. Chile reported attacks. Brazil, Argentina, Colombia all claimed livestock deaths consistent with the Puerto Rican pattern. The creature was going continental. And as it spread, it changed. The bipedal alien description started competing with quadrupedal canine descriptions. Some regions kept the spikes, others dropped them. Eye color varied. Size estimates ranged from small dog to small bear. The unified Tolentino template fragmented into regional variations. This fragmentation should have discredited the legend. If everyone's seeing different things, how can they all be seeing the same creature? But instead, the variations got explained as either subspecies or misidentification. Maybe there are multiple types of Chupacabra. Maybe some sightings are real, and others are dogs getting mistaken for the genuine article. The explanatory framework bent to accommodate contradictions rather than breaking under their weight. This is how belief systems maintain themselves. Evidence that should disprove the claim gets reinterpreted as evidence of complexity. The monster isn't disproven by inconsistent descriptions. It's mysterious, adapts to different environments, has regional variants like any widespread species. By the time the legend reached the southwestern United States in the late 1990s, it had fully bifurcated. Puerto Rico maintained the bipedal alien version. The mainland preferred the quadrupedal canine version, and both claimed to be describing the same creature, despite the descriptions sharing almost nothing in common beyond attacks livestock. Mainland version had one advantage the Puerto Rican version lacked: bodies. Starting around 2000, people in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona began finding hairless, mange-ridden coyotes and claiming they'd killed chupacabras. The bodies got photographed, preserved, sometimes submitted to universities for analysis. Finally, physical evidence that could be tested. Every test came back the same: coyote with sarcoptic mange, sometimes dog, occasionally raccoon. Never anything unidentified. The DNA was mundane. The parasites were mundane. The cause of death was usually gunshot because someone saw a sick, strange-looking animal and shot it before realizing it was just a coyote. This should have ended it. You can't argue with DNA. Can't claim the university scientists are wrong when they show you the genetic markers proving this is Canis latrans, not monstrum chupacabras. The physical evidence conclusively disproved the legend. Except it didn't, because by that point, the chupacabra had achieved what anthropologists call cultural reality. The creature existed in enough people's minds that physical evidence became secondary to social evidence. If your community believes in chupacabras, if your family has stories, if you grew up warned about the goatsucker, then some scientists saying it's actually just sick dogs feels like denial of your lived experience. And in a way, it is. Because even if the creature isn't biologically real, the fear is real. The livestock deaths are real. The economic impact on farmers is real. The social cohesion built around shared monster belief is real. The chupacabra might not exist as an animal, but it absolutely exists as a social phenomenon with tangible effects. This is the gap that debunking can't bridge. Scientists prove the bodies are coyotes. Investigators prove the original description came from a movie. Psychologists explain the confabulation mechanism. And none of it matters because the question, does the chupacabra exist, has two different answers, depending on whether you mean biological existence or cultural existence. Biologically, no. Provably, testably, conclusively, no. Every physical claim has been debunked. Every body identified. Every sighting explained through normal animals, disease, and human psychology. Culturally, yes. Absolutely, undeniably, yes. The chupacabra exists in the same way Santa Claus exists. Not as a physical entity, but as a shared cultural construct that shapes behavior, creates economic activity, and provides narrative structure for understanding events. This dual existence, this ability to be simultaneously fake and real, is what makes modern folklore fascinating. Ancient monsters had the advantage of distance. Nobody could definitively prove or disprove dragons because they supposedly existed centuries ago in places nobody could verify. Modern monsters don't have that luxury. They claim to exist right now in places we can visit, leaving evidence we can test. And we have tested, thoroughly. The evidence conclusively shows the chupacabra isn't real. Yet here we are, 30 years later, with people still reporting sightings, still finding bodies, still believing despite the mountain of evidence proving they're wrong. This persistence reveals something important about how humans process information. We don't evaluate claims based purely on evidence. We evaluate them based on whether they fit existing narratives, whether they're socially validated, whether believing or disbelieving serves our interests. For a farmer who's lost livestock to mysterious deaths, believing in chupacabras provides narrative closure that probably coyotes with mange doesn't. The monster explains why your animals died in ways that feel significant, makes you a victim of something extraordinary rather than just ordinary bad luck, connects your personal tragedy to a larger story that other people recognize and validate. For communities, believing in chupacabras creates shared identity. Your town is the one with monster sightings. You have stories outsiders don't. You're part of something mysterious that generates tourist interest and media attention. The economic and social benefits of monster belief often outweigh the costs of being wrong about biology. For individuals, believing in monsters maintains a sense of wonder in an increasingly explained world. Science has answers for everything. Genetics explains life. Physics explains matter. Chemistry explains interaction. The world becomes predictable, mechanical, boring. But monsters? Monsters are inexplicable. They preserve mystery. They create pockets of the unknown in a world that's been thoroughly mapped and categorized. Believing in the chupacabra means believing there's still something out there that science hasn't explained, that the world is stranger than experts want to admit, that you know something authorities don't. This is why debunking often backfires. When you tell someone their monster isn't real, you're not just correcting a factual error. You're attacking their narrative, their community identity, their sense of wonder, and their resistance to institutional authority, all at once. And people defend those things more fiercely than they defend facts. The chupacabra has become a test case for this dynamic. A monster where we have complete information about its origin, clear evidence about its biological non-existence, and undeniable proof that every physical claim can be explained through normal means. And still the legend persists. Still people believe. Still new sightings get reported. We're past the point where evidence matters. The chupacabra has transcended evidence. It exists now in the realm of collective belief, where facts are secondary to narrative coherence and social validation. Understanding how this happened, why facts failed to stop a legend we watched being created in real time, reveals everything about how modern folklore works, about what humans need from monsters, about why we sometimes choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The chupacabra started as one woman's false memory of a B-movie monster. It evolved into a cultural phenomenon that spans continents and decades. And somewhere in that evolution, it stopped mattering whether the creature was real and started mattering whether people believed it was real. Those are different questions with different answers. And the difference between them explains why 30 years after Species opened in Puerto Rican theaters, people are still seeing goatsuckers in their backyards. The mechanics of how belief persists despite evidence requires understanding who actually reports chupacabra sightings and why. Because the demographic patterns reveal something important about what the monster actually represents. The overwhelming majority of modern chupacabra reports come from rural areas, small farming communities, places where livestock deaths have direct economic impact, where strange predator behavior isn't just unusual, it's threatening your livelihood. These aren't people looking for attention or trying to create tourist attractions. They're people genuinely frightened by something killing their animals in ways that feel wrong. And here's the thing, the attacks do feel wrong. Because sarcoptic mange creates behavior patterns that don't match healthy predator activity. A healthy coyote hunts at dawn and dusk, avoids human areas, kills efficiently, and eats most of the carcass. It's predictable, manageable. Farmers know how to defend against healthy predators. A coyote with severe mange hunts at any hour because it's desperate, approaches human structures because it's too weak for normal hunting. kills but doesn't eat much because the disease has destroyed its appetite and metabolism. Leaves carcasses that look surgically precise because it lacks the strength for the messy, violent feeding that healthy predators do. From a farmer's perspective, this is wrong. The pattern breaks every rule about normal predation. And when something breaks the rules, when behavior stops matching expectations, humans need explanations. The scientific explanation requires understanding parasitology, predator ecology, and disease progression. The Chupacabra explanation requires understanding there's a monster. One of these is significantly easier to grasp and share than the other. The economic factor can't be ignored either. Livestock deaths hurt. Each dead animal is lost income. For small farmers operating on thin margins, a string of mysterious kills can be devastating. Insurance doesn't cover supernatural predation. Government compensation programs require identifying the predator. If you admit it's probably just sick coyotes, you get no help because that's normal wildlife activity. But if it's a chupacabra, that's extraordinary. That might get media attention, might bring investigators, might pressure authorities to actually do something because mysterious monster attacks make headlines where coyotes killed some goats doesn't. This creates perverse incentives for believing in the monster. Not because farmers are lying, but because the system's designed to help them only activate for exceptional circumstances. Claiming chupacabra attacks is rational behavior when the alternative is absorbing losses with no recourse. The generational divide matters too. Older farmers, the ones who've dealt with predators for decades, tend to be more skeptical of chupacabra claims. They've seen sick animals before, recognized mange, dealt with unusual predation patterns. Their experience provides context that younger farmers lack. Younger farmers, especially those who grew up hearing chupacabra stories as children, are more likely to interpret ambiguous evidence as confirming the legend. They were culturally primed to recognize the monster. When livestock die mysteriously, their brain offers chupacabra as an explanation before sick coyote, because that's the framework their culture provided. This generational transmission is how modern folklore sustains itself. Parents tell children about the goatsucker, not as deliberate myth-making, but as genuine warnings about dangers in the area. Children internalize those warnings, grow up expecting chupacabras to exist, and when they encounter evidence that could support either explanation, they choose the one they were taught to recognize. The media amplification cycle compounds this. Every time a news outlet covers a chupacabra sighting even skeptically, it reinforces the creature's cultural presence. The story spreads. More people hear about it. And some percentage of those people will subsequently interpret their own ambiguous experiences as chupacabra encounters, because that's what's fresh in their minds. This is how small local incidents become regional phenomena. A farmer in Texas reports a chupacabra. Local news covers it. Regional news picks it up. National news runs a weird news segment. Suddenly, millions of people have been reminded that chupacabras exist, and a small fraction of those millions will have livestock deaths or strange animal sightings in the following weeks that they now have a framework for interpreting. The cycle is self-sustaining. Media coverage creates awareness. Awareness primes interpretation. Interpretations generate new reports. New reports justify more coverage. Around and around until the creature achieves the kind of cultural saturation where everyone knows what a chupacabra is, even though nobody can prove one exists. Social media accelerated this pattern dramatically. In 1995, spreading a monster legend required traditional media gatekeepers. News directors had to decide the story was worth covering. Newspapers had to give it space. Television needed footage. These barriers meant some stories died before reaching critical mass. By 2010, anyone with a smartphone could photograph a mangy coyote, post it to Facebook with chupacabra in my backyard, and reach thousands of people instantly. No gatekeepers. No fact-checking. No delay between incident and viral spread. The barriers collapsed, and Chupacabra reports exploded accordingly. This democratization of monster reporting had interesting effects. The volume of claims increased massively. But so did the speed of debunking. Experts could respond in comment sections. Reverse image searches could identify recycled photos. The same tools that made spreading legends easier also made debunking them faster. Except debunking on social media often backfires. When experts correct misinformation in comment sections, they're not having a private conversation with the poster. They're performing skepticism for an audience that might interpret expert correction as condescension or cover-up. Some people see debunking and think, oh, I was wrong. Others see it and think they're trying to hide the truth. The Chupacabra became a test case for this dynamic. Photos of mangy coyotes get posted. Wildlife biologists explain what mange looks like. Comment sections fill with people accusing the experts of being paid to cover up the truth. And the original poster, who genuinely thought they'd seen something extraordinary, now has social reinforcement for maintaining their belief despite expert correction. This creates information warfare where facts and fiction have equal weight. A PhD biologist saying, "That's a coyote with mange," has no more impact than a random commenter saying, "The government wants you to think it's mange." Both are just text on a screen. Both claim authority. And the audience chooses which to believe based on prior worldview rather than credential evaluation. The conspiracy theory angle deserves attention because it's become increasingly prominent in modern Chupacabra discourse. The original 1995 explanations focused on aliens and government experiments. These theories positioned the Chupacabra as evidence of cover-ups. Either extraterrestrials were visiting Earth and authorities were hiding it, or military experiments had created monsters that escaped containment. Both narratives serve similar psychological functions. They make the believer special. You know something authorities don't want you to know. You're smart enough to see through the official story. You're part of a community of truth seekers, rather than a population of dupes. These narratives also explain why debunking doesn't work. If you believe the Chupacabra is evidence of government cover-ups, then official explanations are exactly what you'd expect to hear. Scientists saying it's mange aren't providing evidence against the monster. They're providing evidence for the cover-up. The debunking itself becomes proof that something needs debunking. This creates a closed belief system where contradictory evidence strengthens rather than weakens conviction. Religious scholars call this unfalsifiability. Scientists call it non-testable hypothesis. Psychologists call it motivated reasoning. The practical result is that some Chupacabra believers have constructed mental frameworks where nothing can possibly convince them they're wrong. These hardcore believers are actually a minority. Most people who report Chupacabra sightings are just confused about what they saw. Show them mange comparison photos, explain the disease progression, walk through how sick predator behavior creates the attack patterns they witnessed, and they'll usually accept the explanation. They weren't committed believers. They were regular people trying to make sense of unusual events. But the hardcore believers are loud. They create websites, run YouTube channels, organize hunts, maintain the social infrastructure that keeps the legend alive between sighting waves. They're the ideological core that prevents the legend from dying during quiet periods when no new reports are being made. This pattern appears in all modern monster legends. The majority of believers are casual. They think Bigfoot might exist, wouldn't be surprised either way, and aren't particularly invested in the question. But the hardcore believers, the ones who've made monster hunting their identity, sustain the infrastructure that introduces new casual believers. For the Chupacabra specifically, this hardcore community has developed increasingly elaborate explanations for why physical evidence keeps being debunked. Maybe the DNA tests are wrong. Maybe scientists are misidentifying species. Maybe there are multiple creatures being called Chupacabra. and only some are the real ones. Maybe the real chupacabras are smart enough to avoid leaving bodies, while the mangy coyotes are red herrings. Each explanation gets more complex to accommodate new contradictions. This is what belief systems do when threatened by evidence. They don't collapse, they complexify, add epicycles, create subcategories, develop increasingly intricate theories that explain away each piece of disconfirming evidence while maintaining the core claim. Intellectually, it's fascinating. Practically, it's frustrating. Because at a certain point, the belief stops being about the creature and starts being about the believer's identity. Admitting the Chupacabra isn't real means admitting you built your worldview on false foundations. Easier to add another layer of explanation than accept that fundamental premise was wrong. The tourism economy around Chupacabra sightings adds another dimension. Towns in Texas and New Mexico have learned that monster legends bring visitors. Gift shops sell Chupacabra merchandise. Festivals celebrate local sightings. Tour companies offer monster hunting expeditions. There's money in maintaining the legend, even if you personally don't believe it. This economic reality means communities have incentive to amplify rather than debunk reports. A dead mangy coyote is trash. A dead Chupacabra is a tourist attraction. Even if everyone involved knows it's actually just a sick dog, treating it as potentially mysterious generates more economic benefit than boring accuracy. Some towns have gotten quite sophisticated about this. They don't make definitive claims. They say things like, locals report, and mysterious creature, and you decide. The language maintains plausible deniability while encouraging the fun speculation that brings tourists with cameras and credit cards. This isn't unique to chupacabras. Every small town in America with a local monster legend does some version of this. The difference is that chupacabra tourism emerged organically from genuine fear and confusion, then got commercialized after the fact. Other monster towns often started with deliberate invention. The commercialization creates weird feedback loops. Tourists visit expecting monsters. Some percentage will see something ambiguous, a distant animal, poor lighting, unfamiliar wildlife, and record it as a sighting because that's what they came to see. These tourist sightings get added to the local legend, which attracts more tourists, generating more sightings. The economic and social incentives align to sustain the legend regardless of biological reality. Farmers get help with livestock losses. Towns get tourism revenue. Media gets content. Believers get validation. Researchers get funding to study the phenomenon. The only people who don't benefit are the ones insisting on boring accuracy. This creates a situation where the chupacabra's non-existence has become functionally irrelevant. The creature doesn't need to be biologically real to have real effects. The belief itself generates the outcomes that matter to the communities involved. Sociologists call this social construction of reality. The idea that things can be real in their consequences, even when they're not real in their fundamental nature. Money is socially constructed, but shapes everything. Nations are imaginary lines, but people die defending them. Monsters are folklore, but change behavior and generate economic activity. The chupacabra is socially real. That's why debunking fails. You can prove it's not biologically real. You can't prove it's not socially real, because it demonstrably is. People believe in it. Act on that belief. Build institutions around it. Generate economic value from it. The social reality persists regardless of biological reality. This raises uncomfortable questions about what we mean by real. If a monster generates fear, changes behavior, creates economic activity, and shapes community identity, is it meaningfully different from a real creature? The effects are identical. Only the mechanism differs. Philosophers have argued about this for centuries. The map versus the territory. The word versus the thing. The social construction versus the physical fact. The chupacabra is what happens when the social construction becomes more significant than the physical fact. when the map replaces the territory, because people find the map more useful. For farmers dealing with livestock deaths, the map of Chupacabra attacks is more useful than the territory of sarcoptic mange in coyotes, because the map generates responses from authorities, media, and neighbors in ways the territory doesn't. The map is wrong, but it works better than accuracy. For communities seeking identity and economic development, the map of our town has monster sightings is more useful than the territory of our town has sick wildlife, because tourists don't drive ours to see sick coyotes. The map is fiction, but it generates real revenue. For individuals seeking wonder and mystery, the map of unexplained creatures exist is more useful than the territory of everything has been explained, because the map preserves a sense of possibility in a world that feels increasingly deterministic. The map is false, but it provides psychological benefits that truth doesn't. This is what makes the Chupacabra so difficult to eliminate. You're not fighting ignorance, you're fighting utility. People believe in the monster because believing serves purposes that not believing doesn't. And as long as those purposes remain, as long as the social benefits of belief outweigh the costs of being wrong about biology, the creature will persist in cultural reality, regardless of its status in physical reality. The question isn't how to make people stop believing in chupacabras. The question is why we expect them to stop believing when belief serves their interests better than skepticism does. The Chupacabra is economically useful, socially cohesive, psychologically satisfying, and politically empowering for the communities that believe in it. Mange and coyotes is none of those things. From a purely rational cost-benefit analysis, believing in the monster is often the correct choice. You might be wrong about biology, but you're right about what serves your community's needs. And humans, despite our pretensions to rationality, consistently choose useful falsehoods over inconvenient truths when the stakes matter to us personally. The Chupacabra persists because persistence is adaptive. Because communities that believe in the monster get tangible benefits that communities demanding scientific accuracy don't. Because in the marketplace of ideas, useful myths outcompete boring facts more often than we'd like to admit. Understanding this doesn't solve the problem. If anything, it makes the problem more complicated. Because now we're not just dealing with misinformation. We're dealing with misinformation that's been selected for usefulness by the communities that maintain it. And useful misinformation is far harder to correct than simple misunderstanding. The Chupacabra has become optimized for persistence through 3 decades of cultural evolution. The belief system has been tested against every form of debunking and has developed countermeasures for each. It's adapted to scientific skepticism, incorporated contradictory evidence, evolved mechanisms for handling disinformation. It's become a particularly fit meme in Dawkins' original sense. And now we're stuck with it, not because people are stupid, because they're rational actors responding to incentives that reward belief over accuracy. The Chupacabra might not exist, but in every way that matters to the people who believe in it, it does. Which brings us to the larger implications of what we've learned. Because the Chupacabra isn't unique. It's just the most clearly documented example of how modern folklore works, of how myths emerge in the internet age, of what happens when belief serves purposes that reality doesn't. Every conspiracy theory works this way. Every political myth. Every piece of profitable misinformation. They persist not because people can't access correct information, but because correct information doesn't serve their needs as effectively as the fiction does. The Chupacabra teaches us that truth isn't enough. Facts aren't sufficient. Evidence doesn't automatically win. If you want to change minds, you need to provide something that serves the same purposes as the lie, but does it honestly. And that's significantly harder than just pointing out that someone is wrong. Understanding why people believe things despite evidence isn't about fixing ignorance. It's about recognizing that belief systems exist because they're useful to believers. And until you offer something equally useful that happens to be true, You're just yelling into the void about mange and wondering why nobody listens. The role of visual media in sustaining the legend deserves special attention, because photographs and videos of alleged chupacabras spread faster and more convincingly than any written report ever could. And in almost every case, the images show exactly what experts say they show: sick dogs. But perception matters more than reality. A photograph of a hairless, emaciated coyote looks wrong to most people. The animal doesn't match their mental template for what a coyote should look like. It's alien enough, strange enough, unsettling enough that calling it a chupacabra feels more accurate than calling it a sick dog. This is how visual misinformation works. The image is technically accurate. It's genuinely a photograph of a real animal. But the interpretation layer, what people decide the image shows, can be completely wrong while feeling completely right. The wrongness is in the caption, not the content. Social media amplifies this by stripping context. A wildlife biologist posts an educational photo showing what severe mange looks like in coyotes. Someone screenshots it, removes the explanation, adds chupacabra caught in Texas, and now the educational content is misinformation. Same image, opposite meaning. And the viral version spreads further than the original, because mystery is more shareable than education. The algorithms that govern content distribution don't help. They prioritize engagement over accuracy. A post claiming to show a chupacabra gets more comments, shares, and reactions than a post explaining mange. So the algorithm shows more people the monster claim and fewer people the scientific explanation. The platforms aren't deliberately spreading misinformation. They're just optimized to show people what keeps them clicking. And monsters keep people clicking better than parasites do. This creates an information environment where the chupacabra is algorithmically favored over accuracy. Not because of conspiracy, because of commerce. Platforms make money from engagement. Monsters drive engagement. Therefore, platforms systematically amplify monster content over debunking content, even when the debunking is correct and important. The economic incentives of attention-based business models align perfectly with the psychological appeal of monster legends. Both want you emotionally engaged. Both benefit when you share content with friends. Both suffer when you verify information before believing it, because verification reduces spreading behavior. Individual content creators face similar incentives. A YouTube video titled, "I Found a Chupacabra," gets more views than Coyote with Mange Explained. The monster video can be monetized more effectively. Gets recommended to more viewers. Builds a bigger audience. Even if the creator knows it's probably not a real chupacabra, presenting it as mysterious rather than solved serves their economic interests. This isn't unique to monster content. It's how modern media works across all topics. Certainty doesn't generate engagement. Mystery does. Answers don't create shareable content. Questions do. The economic structure of attention-based media systematically rewards ambiguity over clarity and speculation over fact. The chupacabra thrives in this environment. Every ambiguous photo becomes potential monster evidence. Every unexplained livestock death becomes possible attack. Every sick coyote becomes unidentified creature. The ambiguity itself is the product being sold. And clarification kills the product's value. Some creators have become quite sophisticated about maintaining profitable ambiguity. They present evidence without making definitive claims. Show photos of mangy animals while saying things like, "You be the judge," and "What do you think this is?" The audience gets to engage their imagination. The creator avoids making checkable claims. And both parties collaborate in sustaining a fiction that's more entertaining than reality. This creates para-cryptozoology. Not quite science, not quite hoax, existing in the space between where verification is deliberately kept ambiguous. It's entertainment masquerading as investigation. Mystery maintenance rather than mystery solving. and it's extraordinarily effective at keeping audiences engaged. The line between entertainment and belief blurs in this space. People watch Chupacabra content for fun, but unconsciously internalize the framing. They don't actively believe, but they passively accept. And passive acceptance is often sufficient to shape interpretation when they encounter ambiguous evidence in their own lives. This is how modern folklore propagates, not through deliberate teaching, but through entertainment consumption that carries embedded assumptions about what exists in the world. You don't decide to believe in chupacabras. You watch enough content that treats them as potentially real, and eventually, when you see a weird-looking animal, your brain offers maybe chupacabra as a possibility before you've consciously evaluated whether that makes sense. The educational response to this has been mostly ineffective. Science communicators create excellent content explaining mange, predator behavior, and the species-movie connection. But their videos get a fraction of the views that mystery content receives. And their audiences are self-selected people who already want accurate information. The believers aren't watching science communication videos. They're watching monster content. And the algorithms make sure they keep seeing more monster content because that's what their engagement history indicates they want. The educational content and the believers occupy separate information ecosystems that barely overlap. This information segregation is one of the internet age's most troubling developments. It's not that truth is unavailable. It's that truth and fiction have sorted into separate distribution channels that serve separate audiences. And the channels are optimized to keep their respective audiences rather than challenge them. For the Chupacabra specifically, this means accurate information about the legend's origin, and the mange explanation exists and is accessible. But people who believe in the monster will never encounter that information through their normal media consumption. They're in the monster ecosystem. The accuracy is in the science ecosystem, and neither ecosystem has much incentive to push users toward the other. Breaking through this segregation requires more than just creating good content. It requires understanding how content reaches people in the first place. And that's determined by algorithms, social networks, and trust relationships that favor emotional resonance over factual accuracy. Someone who trusts their uncle's Facebook post about seeing a chupacabra will believe that over a scientist's explanation, because trust is distributed through social ties, not credential evaluation. The scientist has better information. The uncle has better trust. And in the competition for belief, trust beats information most of the time. This is why community-level debunking is more effective than expert-level debunking. A respected local farmer saying, "I thought I saw a chupacabra, but it was actually mange," carries more weight than a university biologist saying the same thing. Same information, different messenger, completely different reception. But getting respected community members to publicly correct their own beliefs requires them to accept social costs for accuracy. Admitting you are wrong means losing face. Maintaining belief preserves social standing. The incentives favor persistence over correction, even when people privately suspect they're wrong. Some communities have found middle ground. The implicit understanding that chupacabra sightings are probably mange, but we maintain the legend anyway because it's economically useful and culturally meaningful. Everyone sort of knows it's not real, but agrees to act as if it might be because the shared fiction serves purposes that shared accuracy doesn't. This is folklore as collective fiction with collective benefits. Not delusion, but pragmatic mythology. The community agrees to believe in the monster because the belief is useful, while privately maintaining enough skepticism to avoid acting on the belief in dangerous ways. This sophisticated relationship with legend is probably how ancient communities handled their monsters too. Everyone sort of knew the dragon wasn't literally real, but maintained the story because it served social functions. That literal truth didn't. The difference is, we can now observe this process happening in real time and document exactly how. Communities negotiate between fact and useful fiction. The Chupacabra teaches us that humans have always done this. We've always maintained useful fictions alongside accurate knowledge. The internet age just makes the process more visible and distributes it across much larger populations, much faster than oral tradition ever could. This isn't a problem to be solved. It's a feature of how humans process information. We don't just seek truth. We seek useful narratives. And sometimes useful narratives are fictional. Sometimes the fiction serves our interests better than the truth would. And when that happens, we choose the fiction while maintaining enough awareness to avoid serious harm. The question isn't whether people should believe in chupacabras. The question is what needs the belief fulfills, and whether those needs could be met through accurate information presented in equally compelling ways. If not, then the belief persists because it's filling a gap that truth can't bridge. For rural communities dealing with livestock predation, the Chupacabra provides narrative closure, social solidarity, media attention, and potential economic benefit. The accurate explanation provides none of those things. It just says your animals died from sick dogs, and there's nothing particularly special about it. One explanation makes you part of a mystery. The other makes you part of statistics. Humans don't like being part of statistics. We like being part of stories. And the Chupacabra is a better story than sarcoptic mange will ever be. This preference for story over accuracy is so fundamental to human psychology that trying to fight it seems almost futile. You're not just correcting misinformation. You're asking people to choose boring truth over interesting fiction, to give up narrative significance for statistical reality, to accept that their experience isn't special, just typical. That's a hard sell, maybe an impossible one, which is why the Chupacabra persists, why new sightings keep getting reported, why communities maintain belief in the face of overwhelming evidence. They're not stupid, they're human. And humans need stories more than they need facts. Understanding this doesn't make the misinformation less frustrating, but it explains why debunking fails, why evidence doesn't convince, why the same explanations get rejected over and over, because you're not actually arguing about whether the creature exists. You're arguing about whether people should give up a useful story for an accurate but useless fact. And when framed that way, the persistence makes sense. The story serves purposes the fact doesn't. So people keep the story and dismiss the fact. Not because they're wrong about their interests, but because they're right about what serves those interests best. The Chupacabra will continue existing as long as the conditions that make belief useful persist. As long as rural communities need narrative frameworks for livestock deaths. As long as tourism economies benefit from monster legends. As long as social media rewards mystery over clarity. As long as humans prefer feeling special to accepting statistical normalcy. Those conditions aren't changing anytime soon. So neither is the legend. 30 years after it started, 30 years after we documented its accidental creation, the Chupacabra remains firmly embedded in cultural reality, despite its complete absence from biological reality. And that gap between cultural existence and biological existence reveals everything about how modern folklore works, what humans need from their monsters, and why sometimes the lie is more valuable than the truth. The children growing up with Chupacabra stories will pass them to their own children. Each generation will add their own details, interpretations, and experiences. The legend will continue evolving, adapting to new contexts, surviving because it serves purposes that facts simply can't fulfill. In 50 years, researchers will still be explaining that the Chupacabra started from one woman watching a movie. They'll still be showing the species comparison, still be analyzing mange in coyotes, still be documenting how the legend spread, and people will still be reporting sightings, still be believing, still be maintaining a monster that we watched being accidentally invented. This pattern isn't unique to Chupacabras. Every modern conspiracy theory follows similar trajectories. QAnon, Flat Earth, anti-vax movements. They all begin with someone making a claim, get amplified through media, become socially useful to believers, and persist despite debunking, because debunking addresses facts, while belief addresses needs. The Chupacabra is just uniquely well documented. We have patient zero. We have the exact cultural artifact that inspired the description. We have the timeline showing transmission patterns. We have physical evidence proving alternative explanations. And none of it matters because the belief serves functions that evidence can't address. This is the uncomfortable lesson of modern folklore. Truth is not enough. Facts are insufficient. Evidence doesn't automatically overcome belief when belief is more useful than accuracy. And recognizing this doesn't make it less frustrating. It just makes the frustration more informed. The communities that maintain Chupacabra belief aren't wrong about their interests. They're right that the legend serves them better than the truth does. They're making rational choices given their incentive structures. The problem isn't their reasoning. The problem is a world where those incentive structures reward useful falsehood over inconvenient truth. Fixing that requires changing the incentives, not correcting the information. Requires making truth more valuable than fiction. Making accuracy more useful than mystery. Making facts more rewarding than stories. None of which is easy when human psychology itself is optimized for narrative over data. The Chupacabra persists because we're still the same pattern-seeking, storytelling, meaning-making animals we've always been. We just have better technology for spreading our stories now. The internet didn't create our need for monsters. It just made fulfilling that need more efficient. And that efficiency has consequences. Because when folklore can travel globally in hours instead of generations, when belief systems can recruit worldwide instead of village-wide, when communities of believers can find each other regardless of geography, the old mechanisms for reality checking break down. Small communities maintained folklore, but also fact-checked it through lived experience. If your village claimed dragons existed, but nobody had actually seen one in generations, the belief would gradually weaken. But internet communities never have to confront the absence of actual dragons because they're geographically dispersed enough that someone is always claiming to have seen one somewhere else. The Chupacabra thrives in this dispersed environment. No single community has to reconcile ongoing belief with ongoing absence of evidence because the evidence can always be elsewhere. Someone in Texas saw it. Reports from Mexico confirm it. That tourist in Chile got footage. The fact that you personally never encounter the creature doesn't challenge belief because you're part of a global community where someone is always encountering it. This is belief through distributed testimony. No individual has enough evidence to justify certainty. But the collective testimony of dispersed believers creates the appearance of overwhelming evidence even when each individual data point is weak or explained. It's the same mechanism that maintains UFO belief. Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. Any legend that achieves sufficient geographic and temporal distribution can persist indefinitely because there's always new testimony coming from somewhere, and the disproof of old testimony doesn't affect belief in the phenomenon, just specific claims about it. The Chupacabra has achieved this distribution. It's global, persistent, and sufficiently vague that almost any strange animal sighting or livestock death can be interpreted as supporting evidence. The legend has become unfalsifiable through geographic dispersion and definitional vagueness. This is the end state of successful modern folklore. Not believed by everyone, but believed by enough people spread widely enough that the belief is self-sustaining. Each generation introduces new believers. Each decade adds new sightings. The legend never dies because it never depends on any single community or claim for survival. And this is where we are with the Chupacabra 30 years after it began, embedded, distributed, sustained, a monster that provably started as one woman's. Movie-induced false memory has become a permanent fixture of modern folklore. Not because people are stupid, because the belief serves purposes that accuracy doesn't. Because monsters are useful in ways that explanations about parasitic mites will never be. The question isn't whether the Chupacabra exists. We know it doesn't. The question is whether that matters when millions of people believe it does, when that belief shapes their behavior and their communities, and when all our fact-checking and debunking has failed to convince them otherwise. The answer to that question determines whether we're solving an information problem or confronting a human nature problem. And if it's the latter, then the Chupacabra isn't going anywhere, because human nature isn't upgrading anytime soon. The implications extend beyond one monster, because the Chupacabra is a test case for how information works when truth competes with fiction in an environment optimized for engagement rather than accuracy. Every misinformation campaign follows similar patterns. Start with a claim that's emotionally compelling. Amplify through media that prioritizes engagement. Create community around belief. Develop explanations for contradictory evidence. The Chupacabra did all of this accidentally. Other movements do it deliberately. The difference is smaller than you'd think. The mechanisms are identical. The psychological hooks are the same. The social functions don't change. Whether someone meant to create a legend or stumbled into it, once the legend achieves critical mass, it operates according to the same rules. And those rules are uncomfortable. They suggest that humans are fundamentally more interested in narrative than truth, that will maintain useful fictions over inconvenient facts. That evidence alone isn't sufficient to change minds when belief serves emotional or social needs that truth doesn't fulfill. Smart people are often better at defending wrong beliefs than changing them. They construct more sophisticated rationalizations, find more creative ways to dismiss evidence, build elaborate explanatory frameworks that accommodate contradictions. Intelligence provides tools for justifying what you want to believe, not necessarily for discovering what's actually true. The Chupacabra believers who've constructed complex theories about government cover-ups and selective DNA testing aren't stupid. They're smart people applying intelligence toward maintaining belief rather than evaluating it. That's harder to address than simple misinformation because you're not fighting ignorance. You're fighting motivated reasoning backed by genuine cognitive ability, which is like trying to win a chess game against someone who's using the pieces to build a fort instead. The solution requires changing the incentive structures that make belief more valuable than accuracy, making truth serve the same emotional and social functions that fiction currently serves, creating narratives around accuracy that are as compelling as the narratives around mystery, which is extraordinarily difficult when truth is often boring and reality is frequently disappointing. The Chupacabra continues existing because it meets needs, provides rural communities with narrative frameworks for livestock deaths, creates tourism economies in small towns, offers believers membership in communities of people who see beyond official explanations, sustains a sense of mystery in a world that feels increasingly explained. Sarcoptic mange and coyotes provides none of those things, explains the evidence perfectly, but satisfies exactly zero emotional or social needs that Chupacabra belief fulfills. From a purely functional perspective, believing in the monster is more rational than accepting the explanation, not because the belief is true, but because the belief is useful in ways the truth isn't. This adaptive function explains why religions persist despite lack of evidence, why political myths survive contradictory facts, why conspiracy theories maintain adherence despite debunking. The beliefs serve purposes beyond truth-seeking. Create community, provide meaning, establish identity, all valuable functions that truth alone often can't provide. The Chupacabra operates exactly like small-scale religious movements. Shared belief system, community formation, special knowledge that non-believers lack. And like religious beliefs, it's unfalsifiable by design. Any evidence against the creature gets interpreted as misidentification or cover-up. The core belief remains intact, regardless of how many individual claims get debunked. This is belief as immune system response. Every attack strengthens the defenses. Every piece of contradictory evidence gets incorporated as further proof that something mysterious is being hidden. The belief becomes more complex, more resilient, harder to challenge as it encounters more challenges. Like a virus developing antibiotic resistance, except the virus is an idea and the antibiotics are facts. The original Chupacabra was simple, an alien-looking creature in Puerto Rico. 30 years of challenges have evolved it into a complex phenomenon with subspecies, misidentifications, regional variations, and elaborate theories. The belief system has become more sophisticated than the creature itself. Current believers have heard all the arguments, know about the mange explanation, have encountered the debunking, and they've developed responses to all of it. This is the terminal state of modern misinformation. Not ignorance, but informed resistance. People who know the debunking and reject it, who've evaluated the evidence and decided it's incomplete, who've made conscious choices to maintain belief despite attempts to convince them otherwise. Addressing this requires recognizing that you're not dealing with information deficit. You're dealing with motivated cognition backed by social incentives. The believers aren't missing facts. They're prioritizing values. And when values conflict with facts, values usually win. This isn't irrational. It's human. We're social animals first, truth seekers second. When those roles conflict, biology determines the winner. The mistake most debunkers make is treating this as an education problem. If people just knew the facts, they'd change their minds. But believers already know the facts. They've heard the species connection, seen the mange explanation, encountered the DNA evidence. They're not uninformed. They're differently motivated. And motivation trumps information when the stakes involve community belonging, identity preservation, and social cohesion. This is why the 30 years of perfect information about the Chupacabra's origin haven't mattered. The information is out there, accessible, well documented, and completely insufficient to overcome the social and psychological functions that belief serves. You can't education campaign your way out of problems that aren't fundamentally about education. The environmental movement tried facts about climate change and got nowhere until they started building communities around climate action. Civil rights movements didn't win by just being factually correct about equality. They won by building communities, creating identity, providing belonging around the cause. Made truth serve social functions, not just factual ones. The Chupacabra teaches us that this is required. That facts alone convince nobody when belief serves purposes beyond truth. That changing minds requires addressing the functions belief serves, not just the accuracy of information. What functions does Chupacabra belief serve? Community formation, identity creation, resistance to authority, economic benefit, narrative closure, sense of mystery. Those are real needs. Sarcoptic mange serves none of them. So mange can be 100% correct and still lose to the monster because winning the factual argument doesn't address why people believe in the first place. Until debunkers provide alternative ways to meet those needs, the beliefs persist. And debunkers rarely provide alternatives because that requires understanding psychology and community dynamics, not just biology. Facts are necessary, but insufficient. You also need community, identity, belonging, meaning. Building all that around truth is hard. Debunking fiction without offering functional alternatives is easy but ineffective. Pick your battles accordingly. The 30-year persistence proves the easy approach doesn't work. Proves that having perfect information about the legend's origin changes nothing. Proves that DNA evidence convinces nobody who needs the monster to be real. Facts lose to utility in the marketplace of ideas more often than we'd like to admit. The economic incentives make this worse. Media platforms make money from engagement. Monsters drive engagement better than mange explanations. Algorithms prioritize content that keeps people clicking. So platforms systematically amplify monster content over debunking content even when the debunking is correct. Not through conspiracy, through commerce. Content creators face similar pressures. A YouTube video titled, "I Found a Chupacabra," gets exponentially more views than "Coyote with Mange Explained." The monster video can be monetized more effectively. It's recommended to more viewers. Even creators who know it's probably not a real chupacabra benefit from presenting it as mysterious rather than solved. The economic structure rewards ambiguity over clarity. This creates paracryptozoology. Not quite science, not quite hoax, existing in the space between where verification is deliberately kept ambiguous. Entertainment masquerading as investigation. Mystery maintenance rather than mystery solving. And it's extraordinarily effective at keeping audiences engaged while avoiding checkable claims. The line between entertainment and belief blurs here. People watch Chupacabra content for fun, but unconsciously internalize the framing. They don't actively believe, but they passively accept. And passive acceptance is often sufficient to shape interpretation when they encounter ambiguous evidence in their own lives. You don't decide to believe in chupacabras. You watch enough content that treats them as potentially real, and eventually your brain offers maybe chupacabra as a possibility before you've consciously evaluated whether that makes sense. The visual evidence problem compounds this. Photographs and videos of alleged chupacabras spread faster than any written debunking. And in almost every case, the images show exactly what experts say: sick dogs. But perception matters more than reality. A photograph of a hairless, emaciated coyote looks wrong to most people. Alien enough that calling it a chupacabra feels more accurate than calling it a sick dog. This is how visual misinformation works. The image is technically accurate, genuinely a photograph of a real animal. But the interpretation layer, what people decide the image shows, can be completely wrong while feeling completely right. The wrongness is in the caption, not the content. Someone screenshots an educational photo showing mange symptoms, removes the explanation, adds chupacabra caught in Texas, and now educational content becomes misinformation. Same image, opposite meaning. Social media algorithms don't help. They prioritize engagement over accuracy. A post claiming to show a chupacabra gets more comments, shares, reactions than a post explaining mange. So the algorithm shows more people the monster claim and fewer people the scientific explanation. Not deliberately spreading misinformation, just optimized to show people what keeps them clicking. And monsters keep people clicking better than parasites do. The platforms aren't conspiring. They're just following their business model. Attention equals revenue. Mystery generates attention more effectively than education. Therefore, mystery wins in the content distribution game, regardless of which has better relationship to truth. The invisible hand of the market pushes fiction over fact when fiction is more profitable. Educational responses have been mostly ineffective. Science communicators create excellent content explaining mange and predator behavior, but their videos get a fraction of the views that mystery content receives. And their audiences are self-selected people who already want accurate information. The believers aren't watching science videos. They're watching monster content. And algorithms make sure they keep seeing more monster content because that's what their engagement history indicates they want. The educational content and the believers occupy separate information ecosystems that barely overlap. It's not that truth is unavailable. It's that truth and fiction have sorted into separate distribution channels that serve separate audiences. And neither ecosystem has much incentive to push users toward the other. Breaking through this segregation requires more than creating good content. It requires understanding how content reaches people in the first place. And that's determined by algorithms, social networks, and trust relationships that favor emotional resonance over factual accuracy. Someone who trusts their uncle's Facebook post about seeing a chupacabra will believe that over a scientist's explanation, because trust is distributed through social ties, not credential evaluation. The scientist has better information. The uncle has better trust. And in the competition for belief, trust beats information most of the time. Sorry, scientists. This is why community-level debunking is more effective than expert-level debunking. A respected local farmer saying, "I thought I saw a chupacabra, but it was actually mange," carries more weight than a university biologist saying the same thing. Same information, different messenger, completely different reception. But getting respected community members to publicly correct their own beliefs requires them to accept social costs for accuracy. Admitting you are wrong means losing face. Maintaining belief preserves social standing. The incentives favor persistence over correction, even when people privately suspect they're wrong. This is human social dynamics functioning exactly as designed. Unfortunately, the design prioritizes cohesion over correctness. The gap this creates is enormous between what people know privately and what they'll say publicly, between individual doubt and collective belief, between private skepticism and public faith. Many Chupacabra believers harbor private doubts they'll never express, because expressing doubt means risking community membership. So they maintain public belief while nursing private skepticism, waiting to see if others will break ranks first. This creates pluralistic ignorance. Everyone privately doubts, but nobody says anything because they think they're the only doubter. The community maintains collective belief, even though most members individually question it. But since nobody voices their doubt, nobody realizes doubt is widespread. The belief persists through social pressure, even after factual foundation has crumbled. Breaking pluralistic ignorance requires someone with sufficient social capital to voice doubt without facing exile. Usually someone older, more respected, with deeper community ties. Someone who can say, "I was wrong about this," without losing their standing. Those people are rare. Most community members lack the social capital to risk correction, so they stay quiet. And the silence perpetuates belief nobody individually maintains with confidence. Some communities have found middle ground, the implicit understanding that Chupacabra sightings are probably mange, but we maintain the legend anyway, because it's economically useful and culturally meaningful. Everyone sort of knows it's not real, but agrees to act as if it might be, because the shared fiction serves purposes that shared accuracy doesn't. This sophisticated relationship with legend is probably how ancient communities handled their monsters too. Everyone sort of knew the dragon wasn't literally real, but maintained the story because it served social functions. That literal truth didn't. The internet age didn't create this pattern, just made it visible and accelerated its distribution. When folklore can travel globally in hours instead of generations, when belief systems can recruit worldwide instead of village-wide, when communities of believers can find each other regardless of geography, the old mechanisms for reality checking break down. The Chupacabra thrives in this dispersed environment. No single community has to reconcile ongoing belief with ongoing absence of evidence, because the evidence can always be elsewhere. This is belief through distributed testimony. No individual has enough evidence to justify certainty, but the collective testimony of dispersed believers creates the appearance of overwhelming evidence, even when each individual data point is weak or explained. It's the same mechanism that maintains UFO belief. Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. Any legend that achieves sufficient geographic and temporal distribution can persist indefinitely. The math works in favor of belief. If you're a farmer in Texas and your neighbor saw something, and people in Mexico are reporting sightings, and there are photos from Chile, and that documentary mentioned cases in Argentina, the aggregate feels substantial, even though each individual case has prosaic explanation. The distributed nature prevents anyone from seeing the full pattern of mundane explanations, because they're only exposed to their local incident plus selective reports from elsewhere. This geographic dispersion also prevents falsification. You can't prove the Chupacabra doesn't exist in Texas by showing that Chilean sightings were mangy dogs. Different locations, different creatures, different explanations. The belief becomes unfalsifiable, not through logical sophistication, but through spatial distribution. There's always somewhere else the real ones might be hiding. The internet supercharges this effect. Before global connectivity, belief systems stayed geographically contained. If your region's chupacabras turned out to be dogs, the legend died locally. But now believers in Texas can sustain their belief through reports from Mexico, even after all local cases are explained. The geographic dispersal of testimony creates epistemological resilience that localized beliefs never achieved. The Chupacabra has achieved this distribution. Global, persistent, sufficiently vague that almost any strange animal sighting or livestock death can be interpreted as supporting evidence. This is the end state of successful modern folklore. Not believed by everyone, but believed by enough people spread widely enough that the belief is self-sustaining. The children growing up with Chupacabra stories will pass them to their own children. Each generation will add details, interpretations, experiences. The legend will continue evolving, adapting to new contexts. In 50 years, researchers will still be explaining that the Chupacabra started from one woman watching a movie. And people will still be reporting sightings, still believing. This pattern isn't unique to Chupacabras, QAnon, Flat Earth, anti-vax movements. They all begin with someone making a claim, get amplified through media, become socially useful to believers, and persist despite debunking, because debunking addresses facts while belief addresses needs. The uncomfortable lesson is that truth is not enough. Facts are insufficient. Evidence doesn't automatically overcome belief when belief is more useful than accuracy. The communities that maintain Chupacabra belief aren't wrong about their interests. They're right that the legend serves them better than the truth does. They're making rational choices given their incentive structures. Fixing that requires changing the incentives, not correcting the information. Requires making truth more valuable than fiction. Making accuracy more useful than mystery. None of which is easy when human psychology itself is optimized for narrative over data. Maybe the problem is unsolvable. Maybe humans are permanently vulnerable to useful lies. Maybe evolution optimized us for group cohesion rather than truth-seeking, and that's just how we work now. Maybe the best we can do is recognize the pattern, understand why it happens, and mitigate the worst consequences while accepting we can't eliminate the underlying mechanism. Individual scientists build communities around curiosity that provide meaning without requiring false beliefs. Local educators create belonging around learning that makes truth socially rewarding. Small movements build identity around accuracy. But scaling those successes to address mass misinformation? Nobody knows how. The tools that work for dozens don't work for millions. The approaches that succeed in controlled environments fail in the wild information ecosystem. The Chupacabra will exist in cultural reality indefinitely. New generations will grow up with the stories. Communities will form around the legend. Tourism economies will develop. The belief will serve functions, and those functions will sustain the belief regardless of its relationship to truth. We can document this process, understand the mechanisms, explain why it happens, but documentation isn't prevention. Understanding isn't solution. The underlying condition is human psychology. Our need for narrative, community, identity, and meaning. Our preference for belonging over accuracy when forced to choose. Our willingness to maintain useful lies rather than accept inconvenient truths. Those are features, not bugs. Evolved characteristics that served our ancestors and continue serving us even when they produce false beliefs. The Chupacabra is one result. There will be others. Our others will continue being others as long as humans need what truth can't provide and fiction can. And recognizing that pattern doesn't stop it, just makes it visible, makes us aware of what we're watching, informed about why our fact-based approaches fail, Understanding might help us choose our battles better. Recognize when debunking will work and when it won't. Identify which beliefs are changeable and which are functionally fixed. Or maybe understanding just makes us more frustrated, because now we know why solutions require changing human nature or restructuring incentive systems in ways we don't know how to do. We're stuck with human nature as it exists, with vulnerability to useful lies, with preference for fiction over fact when fiction serves us better. The best we can do is recognize this. Build systems that account for it rather than assuming it won't happen. Create communities around truth that serve needs as effectively as communities around fiction. But nobody knows how to do that successfully at scale. The Chupacabra proves it. Every other persistent false belief confirms it. And recognizing we don't have solutions is the first step toward maybe eventually developing them. Or at least accepting that some problems don't have solutions and learning to live with that reality. Let's get specific about what actually happened, because the origin story matters, even if believers ignore it. Madelyne Tolentino walked into a Puerto Rican theater on July 7, 1995, and watched Species. Saw H.R. Geiger's alien design with spines down its back, huge dark eyes, and bipedal stance. Left the theater with that imagery fresh in her mind. A month later, surrounded by media coverage of mysterious livestock deaths, her brain produced a false memory that synthesized the movie monster with her environment. She looked out her window and saw what she genuinely believed was a creature matching Sill's description. Reported it sincerely. A local UFO researcher drew a sketch based on her account. The sketch hit newspapers. Within days, other people started reporting the same creature, all matching Tolentino's description because they'd seen the sketch, all copying the template she provided, all reinforcing each other's credibility through volume. If one person sees a monster, that's delusion. If 200 people see it, that's evidence. Except it's not evidence. It's social contagion operating at the speed of mass media. Puerto Rican comedian Silverio Perez gave it a name during a radio broadcast discussing the attacks. El Chupacabras. The goat sucker, perfect, memorable, unsettling enough to stick. The name is probably the best branding decision anyone ever made by accident. El Show de Cristina, basically the Oprah of Latin America, broadcast the phenomenon to millions of Spanish speakers across multiple countries. The legend went continental within months. Achieved the distribution and cultural saturation that makes belief self-sustaining. By the time anyone thought to fact-check Tolentino's account, the creature was already embedded in popular culture. The debunking came years too late to matter. Here we are 30 years later. The creature that walked out of Tolentino's false memory of a B-movie has become the third most famous cryptid in the world. More people believe in the Chupacabra than have ever seen Species. More communities maintain the legend than could identify H.R. Geiger's artwork. The source is forgotten. The monster persists. Benjamin Radford spent 5 years investigating the phenomenon. Interviewed Tolentino directly. Asked her about Species. She admitted she'd seen it. Acknowledged the resemblance. Described how the movie creature looked exactly like what she claimed to have seen outside her window. The timeline is perfect. The imagery matches precisely. The connection is undeniable. And nobody cares. The believers who've heard about Radford's research have explanations. Maybe she saw the creature first, and the movie just happened to depict something similar. Maybe both are depicting real creatures that exist independently. Maybe the government created the monsters, and the movie was predictive programming. The belief system has adapted to incorporate the debunking as further evidence of something mysterious. This is what makes modern misinformation unstoppable. It's not static. It evolves, incorporates challenges, develops immunity to fact-checking. The Chupacabra legend has been vaccinated against the species connection through 30 years of exposure to that criticism. Believers have heard it, processed it, and built defenses against it. The only thing the Chupacabra exists because of his 1995 alien sex movie. That's the factual origin. Provable, documented, undeniable, and completely irrelevant to the millions who believe in the creature now. Because they're not maintaining a belief about movie-inspired confabulation. They're maintaining communities, identities, and meaning-making frameworks that happen to include a monster. Taking away the monster means taking away the framework. Proving it's fake doesn't provide alternatives. Showing the species connection doesn't meet the needs that belief currently fulfills. So the fact of origin, no matter how well documented, changes nothing. The creature that walked out of Tolentino's false memory isn't going anywhere. The lesson about why facts don't matter when belief serves functions. That's not going anywhere either. And understanding both just makes you an informed observer of problems you can't solve, which is the academic equivalent of being really good at describing how you're drowning. Good night. Lock your doors if it makes you feel safer, though you're statistically more likely to die from a regular coyote than a movie monster that doesn't exist. The Chupacabra isn't real, but its non-existence hasn't stopped it from thriving for 30 years. Reality is optional when fiction serves you better. Sleep well. And remember, if tomorrow you see something strange that you can't identify, the boring explanation is probably correct. Probably just a sick dog. But boring doesn't make good stories. And humans will always choose good stories over accurate ones when we can get away with it. Sweet dreams. Maybe skip species and anything else H.R. Geiger designed. And when someone tells you they saw a Chupacabra, remember, they saw something, got confused, and reported the monster their culture provided, because that was easier than admitting they don't know what mangy animals look like. The creature is fake. The lesson is real. We create what we need, believe what serves us, maintain what works. Sometimes what works is fiction. The Chupacabra only exists because of a 1995 alien sex movie. And it persists because useful lies outlive inconvenient truths every single time. That's not a bug. That's the operating system.